I never imagined that a single impulsive decision would unravel my life so completely. My name is Michael, and for the last 10 years, I've been married to Laura. She was everything to me: beautiful, kind, and fiercely independent. From the moment we met at a mutual friend's wedding, I was smitten. Our connection felt cosmic, as if we'd known each other in another life. She laughed at my jokes, even the bad ones, and understood me in a way no one else ever had. Laura was a school counselor, passionate about helping troubled teens find their way. I, on the other hand, worked in tech where every day was a race against the next product launch. Our worlds were different, but we made it work. We bought a charming old house in the suburbs, complete with a picket fence and a golden retriever named Max. By all accounts, we had the perfect life. But life is a way of testing perfection. It started subtly. Laura began staying later at work. It's parent-teacher conference season, she'd explain, brushing a kiss on my cheek as she slipped out the door. I believed her. After all, I had no reason not to. Her dedication to her students was one of the things I admired most about her. Then came the nights she'd disappear into her phone, smiling faintly at messages I wasn't privy to. When I asked, she said it was work stuff. I didn't press. Everyone has the right to their privacy, right? It was a rainy Tuesday evening when I met her colleague, Nick, for the first time. He showed up at our doorstep, all 6 feet of him, with a cocky smile and an umbrella. "Sorry to bother you," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. "Laura left some papers at the office, and I thought she might need them." Laura appeared almost instantly, her face lighting up like I hadn't seen in years. "Nick, you didn't have to bring them by," she said, though her tone suggested she was glad he had. That was the first ripple in the smooth waters of our marriage. Nick's visit should have been a non-event, just a kind gesture from a coworker. But something about the way Laura's eyes lit up stuck with me. I couldn't shake it. That night, as we lay in bed, I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was reading too much into things. Laura had always been outgoing, her smile easy and her demeanor warm. But now, I found myself scrutinizing her every move. "Nick seems nice," I said, casually testing the waters. She looked up from her book, her expression neutral. "He's great to work with. The kids love him." "Why do you ask?" "No reason," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just making conversation." Laura didn't press, and the subject quickly changed. But the seeds of doubt had been planted. Over the next few weeks, little things started to pile up. Laura seemed distracted, her phone always in hand. She was texting more often, and though she didn't hide her screen, she angled it just enough that I couldn't see who she was messaging. When I asked her about it, she laughed it off. "School drama," she said. "You wouldn't believe the gossip that flies around." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But then there were the nights when she'd come home later than usual. "Meeting ran over," she'd explain. Or one of the kids was having a tough time. I stayed to talk them through it. Perfectly plausible excuses. Yet something about her tone felt rehearsed, almost mechanical. One evening, curiosity got the better of me. As she showered, I picked up her phone from the nightstand. It was locked, of course. Not that it mattered. I didn't even know what I was looking for. But the act alone filled me with guilt. I put it down, ashamed of myself. "Michael?" Her voice startled me. She was standing in the doorway, a towel wrapped around her. "What are you doing?" "Nothing," I said too quickly, stepping away from the phone. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't say anything more. Instead, she walked past me, picking up the phone and holding it tightly as she headed into the bedroom. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. Was I imagining things? Or was there really something going on? I told myself I was being paranoid, that Laura would never betray me. But doubt has a way of creeping in, no matter how hard you try to shut it out. A week later, Laura told me she'd be working late again. "Budget meetings," she said, slipping her earrings on in the hallway mirror. Her tone was light, casual, but her reflection wouldn't meet my gaze. "Budget meetings again?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. "That's what, the 3rd time this month?" She hesitated, just a fraction of a second, before plastering on her trademark smile. "It's crunch time. You know how it is. Everyone's scrambling to make sure the numbers add up." I nodded but didn't respond. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. As she kissed me goodbye and walked out the door, Max padded up beside me, looking up as if he, too, sensed the tension. That evening, I couldn't shake the unease. I tried to distract myself by cooking dinner and catching up on work emails, but my mind kept drifting back to Laura. What was she really doing? Was I overreacting? I felt like a fool, even entertaining the thought of her being unfaithful. Laura wasn't the type. At least I didn't think she was. But doubt had taken root, and it refused to let go. Around 9 p.m., I decided to go for a drive. The house felt too quiet, too stifling. Without a destination in mind, I found myself heading toward Laura's school. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was as if my instincts had taken over. The parking lot was nearly empty when I arrived, save for a few scattered cars under the dim glow of the streetlights. I recognized Laura's sedan parked near the front. Just as I was about to drive away, a sleek black car pulled up beside hers. Out stepped Nick. I froze, my hands tightening around the steering wheel. Nick glanced around, then headed inside. I sat there, my mind racing. It could be nothing, I told myself. Maybe he was just picking something up from the office. But why was he here so late? Why didn't Laura mention he'd be working with her? After what felt like an eternity, I decided to go home. Confronting Laura with nothing but suspicions would only drive a wedge between us, and I wasn't ready to face the answers to the questions swirling in my head. When Laura got home an hour later, she seemed flustered. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her cheeks flushed. "Long night," she said, dropping her bag by the door. "How'd it go?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Fine," she replied, too quickly. "Just a lot of paperwork." I nodded, pretending to accept her answer, but my mind was already piecing things together. That night, as she slept soundly beside me, I lay awake, grappling with the sinking feeling that my world was beginning to crack. The days that followed were marked by tension I couldn't ignore. Laura acted normal, too normal. She laughed at my jokes, leaned in for kisses, and went about her routine as though nothing had changed. But I couldn't shake the image of Nick stepping out of that car, or the look on her face when she came home that night. I decided to keep an eye on things. I wasn't proud of it, but the gnawing doubt in my gut had grown too large to ignore. It started small, paying closer attention to her schedule, the tone of her voice when she mentioned work. Then, one evening, I found myself checking her phone again. This time I noticed something, a new contact. It wasn't labeled as Nick, but the name Kendra W. stuck out. Laura never mentioned anyone named Kendra. My chest tightened as I stared at the screen, debating what to do. Part of me wanted to wake her up right then and there, but I couldn't risk a confrontation without proof. I put the phone down and walked out to the kitchen to collect my thoughts. The next morning, I decided to trust my instincts. Before Laura left for work, I casually asked, "How's everyone at school? Still busy with budget season?" She nodded while sipping her coffee. "Oh, you know how it is? Everyone's stressed. Even Nick's been staying late to help." I studied her face for a flicker of hesitation. "Nick seems like a good guy," I said nonchalantly. "You two seem to get along well." She froze for the briefest moment, her eyes darting toward me, before she quickly composed herself. "He's a great colleague," she said, setting her mug down with a nervous laugh. "Why do you ask?" "No reason," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just curious." As she kissed me goodbye and left, I stared out the window, a bitter taste in my mouth. Something wasn't adding up. That night, I did something I never thought I'd do. I installed a GPS tracker on her car. The guilt was immediate, but I told myself it was the only way to get clarity. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed answers. The first 2 nights, nothing unusual happened. Her car went from the school to the grocery store to home. But on the 3rd night, the tracker showed her at an unfamiliar address in the next town over. My stomach churned as I stared at the blinking dot on my phone. I made a decision. Grabbing my keys, I drove to the address. When I arrived, I parked down the street, my heart pounding. The house was modest, its porch light casting a soft glow. Laura's car was parked in the driveway. As I sat there, debating my next move, the front door opened. And there she was, stepping outside with Nick. They didn't touch, but the way they leaned in close, Their laughter carrying through the still night air made it clear they weren't just colleagues. My chest felt like it was caving in as I watched them. When she got back home later that night, she slipped in a bed beside me as if nothing had happened. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning with questions and a growing fury I didn't know how to contain. The image of Laura and Nick outside that house burned into my mind like a brand. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her laughing, carefree, as though nothing in the world could bother her. I didn't recognize the woman I had married in that moment. That wasn't the Laura who used to curl up beside me on the couch, who told me I was the only person who understood her. That morning, I decided I needed answers, but I wasn't sure how to get them. If I confronted her now, she'd likely deny everything. Without hard proof, I'd only come off as paranoid, and the cracks in our marriage would deepen. So I waited. The days stretched into a strange kind of limbo. Laura continued her routine as though nothing was wrong, but I began noticing small, telling signs. She was on her phone more often, her face lighting up in a way that hadn't happened when she looked at me in months. She'd laugh softly at texts, sometimes biting her lip before quickly putting the phone down when I entered the room. I tried to stay calm, but my frustration grew. I couldn't focus at work. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt a surge of dread, half expecting it to be some message that would confirm my worst fears. My coworkers noticed my distraction, but I brushed off their concern with excuses about tight deadlines and lack of sleep. On Friday night, I decided to test the waters. Laura and I were having dinner, takeout as usual, since neither of us had the energy to cook after a long week. As she scrolled through her phone, I asked casually, "Any big plans this weekend?" She glanced up, her expression neutral. "Not really. Just catching up on some work." "Why?" I shrugged, just wondering, maybe we could do something together? It feels like we haven't had much time for us lately. Her smile was small, almost apologetic. "That sounds nice, but I really do need to catch up on some grading. Maybe next weekend?" I nodded, trying to mask the sting. "Sure, no problem." That night, after she went to bed, I opened the GPS tracking app. Sure enough, the next day, her car ended up at the same house. This time, she stayed longer. When she came home, I pretended to be asleep, my back turned to her. I felt the mattress shift as she climbed into bed. She didn't say a word, and soon, I heard the soft rhythm of her breathing as she drifted off. But I couldn't sleep. The weight of the silence between us was suffocating. I knew I couldn't put off the confrontation much longer. I needed to confront her, to lay everything bare. But how do you ask the person you love if they're betraying you? How do you open that door, knowing you might not like what's on the other side? The following morning, I woke up determined. I couldn't live in this limbo any longer. Every laugh she shared with Nick in that driveway haunted me. Every lie she fed me chipped away at the foundation of our life together. It was time to confront her, no matter the outcome. As Laura sat at the breakfast table, scrolling through her phone, I took a deep breath and sat across from her. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. She looked up, startled. "What's wrong?" I hesitated, the words caught in my throat. But then I thought of the long nights I'd spent staring at the ceiling, the moments of doubt and pain I'd endured in silence. "Where were you yesterday?" I asked, my tone deceptively calm. She blinked, clearly caught off guard. "At school, grading papers." "Why?" I stared at her, waiting for her to break under the weight of my gaze. But she didn't. She just looked at me, her expression unchanging. That was when I realized she wasn't going to confess. Not without being pushed. "Are you sure about that?" I pressed. "Because I know you weren't." Her face paled slightly, but she quickly recovered. "Michael, what are you talking about? Why are you accusing me of something?" I leaned forward, my voice low but firm. "I followed you, Laura. I know about the house. I know you've been meeting Nick there." Her reaction was instant. Her eyes widened, and she sat back in her chair as though I'd physically pushed her. For a brief moment, I thought she might deny it again, but then her shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky breath. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I laughed bitterly. "Isn't it? Because it sure looked like you were having a great time with him while I was sitting at home, wondering why my wife is suddenly a stranger." Laura's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel the sympathy I usually would. Instead, I felt a cold, detached anger. "Michael, please," she said, reaching for my hand. "Let me explain." "Go ahead," I said, pulling my hand away. "Explain." She took a deep breath, as if steadying herself. "Nick and we've been working on a project for the school. It's something personal for one of the students, and we didn't want anyone else to know. That's why we've been meeting off campus." "Isterte here, incredulous. That's the best you've got? A secret school project?" "It's the truth," she insisted, her voice rising. "You're blowing this out of proportion. Don't insult my intelligence." I snapped, my voice finally breaking with anger. "I saw the way you looked at him, Laura. I've seen the texts you've been hiding. You think I don't know?" Her face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw the cracks in her armor. She looked away, her silence louder than any confession. "Tell me the truth," I demanded, my voice shaking. "How long has it been going on?" Her shoulders shook as she began to cry. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she said, her words barely audible. It just did." The room felt like it was spinning. Her vague admission hit me like a punch to the gut. "How long?" I asked again, my voice cold. She wiped her tears and finally met my eyes. "A few months." I leaned back, the air knocked out of me. "Months." Months of lies, of betrayal, of her choosing someone else over me. "I'm sorry, Michael," she said, her voice cracking. "I never meant to hurt you. I got lost." I stared at her, struggling to process the words. The woman I had loved and trusted for a decade had been deceiving me. And now, here we were, standing on the edge of something irreparable. I sat in stunned silence, Laura's words hanging in the air like smoke, choking me. "A few months," I repeated, as if saying it out loud would help it make sense. It didn't. My chest felt tight, a mix of rage and heartbreak threatening to suffocate me. Laura sat across from me, her hands trembling as she twisted her wedding ring around her finger. She couldn't look me in the eye anymore. "It was a mistake," she whispered. "I didn't mean for it to happen." "A mistake," I repeated, my voice colder than I thought possible. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or burning dinner. Sneaking around with another man for months isn't a mistake, Laura. It's a choice." She flinched, her tears spilling over. I know I've ruined everything. I never wanted this to happen. I love you, Michael. I still love you." The words stung more than they soothed. "You have a funny way of showing it," I said bitterly. "Was it worth it? Was he worth it?" She shook her head vehemently. "It wasn't about him. It was about me. I felt, I don't know, invisible, lost. It's no excuse, but—" I cut her off, my anger boiling over. "You felt lost? So instead of talking to me, you ran to Nick? Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? How much this hurts?" "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her voice cracking. "It started with conversations, harmless, I thought. But then things got complicated. I didn't know how to stop." "You didn't know how to stop?" I scoffed. "How about not starting in the first place?" She buried her face in her hands, sobbing openly now. A part of me wanted to comfort her, to reach across the table and hold her. But another part, the part she had broken, couldn't muster an ounce of compassion. "Not yet. What did you think would happen?" I asked, my voice quieter now, but no less strained. "Did you think I wouldn't find out? Or did you just not care?" "I didn't think," she admitted, her words muffled by her hands. "I was selfish and stupid. I wasn't thinking about you, or us, or the consequences. I was just, I don't know." I stared at her, searching for any hint of the woman I had loved for so long. But all I could see was a stranger. "What happens now?" she asked after a long silence, her voice small and hesitant. I didn't have an answer for her. My mind was a storm of emotions: anger, betrayal, grief, confusion. Part of me wanted to kick her out right then and there, to strip her of any place in the life we had built together. But another part, buried deep under the pain, clung to the memories of the good times, of the love we had shared. "I don't know," I admitted finally. "But I can't look at you right now. I need time to think." Laura nodded, wiping her tears with trembling hands. "I'll give you space. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right, Michael. Please, just don't give up on us." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I stood and walked away, leaving her alone at the table. As I closed the bedroom door behind me, I felt the weight of our shattered marriage pressing down on me, suffocating and relentless. The hours that followed were some of the longest of my life. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, replaying every moment of my marriage to Laura. Every laugh, every kiss, every promise felt like a cruel joke now. How could she have done this? How could she have thrown away everything we built for him? I heard her moving around the house, her steps hesitant, careful not to disturb me. At one point, Max padded into the room and rested his head on my knee, his soft eyes full of concern. I scratched behind his ears absent-mindedly, grateful for the silent comfort he offered. By evening, the silence between Laura and me had grown deafening. I could hear her in the living room, pacing back and forth. I imagined her rehearsing what she'd say if I decided to confront her again. But I couldn't face her yet, not without losing my temper or breaking down completely. Finally, I stepped out of the bedroom, my throat dry but my resolve firm. Laura was sitting on the couch, her knees pulled to her chest, clutching a throw pillow like it was her last lifeline. When she saw me, she sat up straighter, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Michael," she began, her voice shaky. "Can we talk?" I hesitated but nodded. "Talk," I said, my tone clipped. She took a deep breath. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't even know if I can forgive myself. But I need you to know that what I did, it wasn't because of anything you did. You've always been good to me. You've always been more than enough." I clenched my fists, her words doing little to ease the ache in my chest. "Then why, Laura? Why would you do this?" Tears welled up in her eyes again. I don't know how to explain it. I felt disconnected. From myself, from you, from everything. Nick was just there. He listened when I felt like no one else did. But it wasn't real. It was never real. I scoffed, the bitterness in my voice surprising even me. "It felt real enough for you to risk everything." She flinched but didn't argue. "I know. And I was wrong. I see that now. But I want to fix this. I want to fix us." I looked away, the pain and anger swirling inside me, making it impossible to meet her gaze. "You don't just fix this, Laura. This isn't a broken appliance. This is our marriage. And you broke it." She nodded, her tears falling freely now. "I know. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes, Michael. Therapy, counseling, whatever you want. Please just don't give up on me. On us." Her desperation was palpable, but I couldn't let it sway me. "Not yet. I don't know if I can do that," I said quietly. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Her sobs grew louder, but I turned away, retreating to the bedroom once more. I needed time to think, to process everything. But as I closed the door behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was far from over. The next morning was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your chest, heavy and suffocating. I didn't bother saying goodbye to Laura when I left for work. I didn't trust myself to speak without unleashing the torrent of anger and heartbreak that had simmered all night. At the office, I couldn't focus. My coworkers noticed, though no one pried. I'd always been the reliable one, the guy with his head on straight, but today I felt like a man unraveling. At lunch, instead of joining the usual group for a bite, I sat in my car and stared at my phone. My finger hovered over the contact for my best friend, Eric. Eric was the kind of guy who always knew what to say, but he also had a zero-tolerance policy for bullshit. If I told him what Laura had done, there would be no walking it back. I wasn't ready for that yet. Instead, I opened a private browser and searched for divorce lawyers in my area. Just seeing the search results felt like betrayal. But betrayal of whom, exactly? By the time I got home, the guilt and uncertainty had twisted into a gnawing pit in my stomach. I walked in to find Laura sitting on the couch, her laptop open but untouched. She looked up as I entered, her eyes searching mine for any sign of reconciliation. "Michael," she started softly. "Can we please talk tonight?" I set my keys down, the sound echoing louder than it should have in the stillness. "Fine," I said curtly, heading to the kitchen. "I'll eat first." As I ate a hastily thrown-together sandwich, I could hear her pacing in the living room. She was nervous, and part of me relished it. She deserved to feel uncomfortable after everything she'd put me through. But another part, a quieter, weaker part, ached for the woman I used to know, the woman I had built a life with. When I finally sat across from her, she clasped her hands tightly, like she was trying to hold herself together. "I've been thinking a lot," she began. "And I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I need to explain everything." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "Go ahead," I said, my voice colder than I intended. She swallowed hard. "It started months ago," she admitted. "At first, it was just casual conversations at work. Nick and I would talk during lunch or after meetings. He was kind, attentive, and I felt—" She stopped, her voice catching. "You felt what?" I pressed, my anger bubbling to the surface. "What could he possibly give you that I couldn't?" Her shoulders sagged. "It wasn't about him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was about me. I felt invisible, Michael, like I was just going through the motions. You were always so busy, so focused on work. I didn't know how to tell you that I felt alone. Alone." I snapped, my voice rising. "You could have talked to me, Laura. You could have told me how you felt. Instead, you ran to him." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know. I should have. But it was easier, safer, to let Nick fill that void. I didn't think about the consequences. I didn't think about you." Her words cut deeper than I expected. She had been hurting, and I hadn't seen it. But did that excuse what she'd done? Did it make her betrayal any less painful? "Do you love him?" I asked suddenly, the question burning in my throat. She shook her head quickly. "No, it was never about love. It was a distraction, a mistake." I laughed bitterly. "A mistake? That's what you're calling it? Months of lying, sneaking around, betraying me. That's just a mistake to you?" "I'm sorry," she sobbed, her hands covering her face. "I don't know what else to say. I'm so sorry." I stood, the weight of her confession pressing down on me. "Sorry isn't enough, Laura. I don't even know if I want to try to fix this." Her head snapped up, panic flashing in her eyes. "Michael, please. I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just don't give up on us." I stared at her, my heart warring with my head. The woman I loved was still in there somewhere, but could I ever look at her the same way again? Could I ever trust her again? Without a word, I turned and walked to the bedroom, leaving her alone in the living room. As I closed the door behind me, I felt the first cracks of doubt in my resolve. What if she was right? What if there was still something left to save? The next morning, the house was unnervingly quiet. Laura had already left for work, though I noticed she'd left a note on the kitchen counter. "Michael, I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I've made an appointment with a therapist for us next week. I hope you'll consider going. I love you." I crumpled the note and tossed it into the trash. It felt hollow, like everything else she'd said lately. Therapy wasn't going to fix the mess she'd created, or the parts of me that were now shattered. As I poured myself a cup of coffee, I caught sight of her car keys on the counter. She'd taken a rideshare, probably to avoid any confrontation this morning. Her car was still in the driveway, and the temptation was too strong to resist. I grabbed the keys and stepped outside, opening the door to her sedan. Her car was pristine as always, but it wasn't the cleanliness I was interested in. I opened the glove compartment first, finding nothing but the usual registration papers and gum wrappers. Then I checked the center console. That's where I found it, a second phone, sleek and black, hidden beneath a pile of receipts. My heart pounded as I powered it on. The screen lit up, and I immediately saw a string of notifications from someone labeled N. My stomach churned. I clicked the messages, and my worst fears were confirmed. There were dozens of them, stretching back weeks, if not months. "N, I miss you already. N, can't stop thinking about last night. You looked incredible. N, let me know if he's gone tonight so I can stop by." The bile rose in my throat. She'd lied to me again, about the timeline, about her feelings, about everything. I'd been stupid to believe her tears and apologies, to think she might actually be remorseful. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a full-blown affair, planned and nurtured behind my back. I scrolled further, my hands shaking. There were photos too, selfies of the two of them at some restaurant, laughing, his arm draped casually around her shoulders. A picture of a hotel room bed, rumpled sheets and all. And the worst, a message from In just last night. I can't wait until we can be together without sneaking around. The phone slipped from my hand, landing on the passenger seat with a dull thud. My vision blurred as the reality of it all sank in. This wasn't something that could be fixed with therapy or time. This was betrayal on a level I hadn't even considered. I left the car, slamming the door shut behind me. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Who else knew? Was Nick planning to replace me in my own home? My own life? The thought made my blood boil. I went back inside, pacing the living room like a caged animal. I couldn't sit with this information. I needed to confront her. I grabbed my phone and dialed her number, my hand still trembling. She picked up on the second ring. Michael. Her voice was cautious, wary. I found your second phone, Laura, I said, my voice tight with anger. The one you've been using to text Nick. The line went silent for a moment. Then, I can explain. Don't, I snapped. Don't you dare try to explain this. You've been lying to me from the start, haven't you? Michael, please, she pleaded. I was going to tell you everything. I cut her off. When? After you packed your bags and ran off with him? Don't insult me, Laura. I deserve better than this. I swear it's over, she said, her voice breaking. I ended it. The phone, it was just habit. I didn't know how to stop lying. I yelled, my voice echoing in the empty house. You were planning a life with him, weren't you? Don't think I didn't see his message about not sneaking around anymore. She didn't respond, her silence confirming everything I feared. My chest ached, my hands clenched into fists. This was it. The moment I realized there was no saving us. I want you out of the house tonight, I said coldly. I don't care where you go, but don't be here when I get back. Michael, please, she sobbed. I don't want to lose you. You already have, I said, and hung up. I sat on the couch, my head in my hands, as the weight of the conversation sank in. The life I thought I had was gone, replaced by a tangled mess of lies and betrayal. And for the first time, I wasn't sure who I was without it. When I arrived home that evening, the house was dark. Laura's car was gone, and the eerie quiet made it feel like the walls were closing in. For a moment, I wondered if she had actually left as I demanded, but as I stepped into the living room, I saw her suitcase near the door. She'd packed, but hadn't left yet. I found her sitting on the couch, her face streaked with tears. Michael, please, she said softly. Can we talk before I go? I wanted to yell, to tell her to get the hell out and never come back, but the part of me that needed answers held me back. Talk, I said, standing stiffly near the doorway. I made mistakes, she began, her voice trembling. I was selfish and stupid, and I hurt you in ways I can't even begin to apologize for. But I never wanted to leave you. I love you, Michael. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh even to my own ears. You have a funny way of showing it. Planning a life with Nick behind my back? Lying to me for months? That doesn't sound like love, Laura. That sounds like betrayal. She winced, but to her credit, she didn't look away. I wasn't planning anything with him, she insisted. He wanted more, but I ended it before it could go that far. I threw my hands up in frustration. Before it could go that far? Do you hear yourself? You've already destroyed everything, Laura. There's no before anymore. She stood, taking a hesitant step toward me. I know I've ruined everything, but I can't just give up on us. We've been through so much together. Doesn't any of that matter? It mattered to me. I shot back. But clearly it didn't matter to you. You chose him, Laura. Over and over again. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, I didn't choose him. I was lost, Michael. I was scared of how disconnected I felt, of how much we'd drifted apart. I should have come to you. I see that now, but I can't change the past. I stared at her, my anger warring with a flicker of the love I once felt. Could I believe her? Could I trust her, even if I wanted to? And then, like a storm cloud rolling in, a thought struck me. What about him? I asked. Is he going to let this go as easily as you say you will? Her eyes widened slightly, and for the first time, I saw fear in her expression. Nick, he doesn't matter anymore. I told him it was over. But does he believe it? I pressed. Because if he's been waiting for you to leave me, I doubt he's just going to walk away quietly. She looked down, her hands twisting together nervously. He's persistent, she admitted. But I'll handle it. You'd better, I said coldly. Because if he comes near this house, or me, there will be consequences. I stepped past her, my frustration boiling over, and headed to the bedroom. I needed space, time to think, to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. But as I sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of her words and her omissions settled over me. Was she telling the truth about ending things with Nick? Or was this just another lie, another attempt to manipulate me into giving her what she wanted? As I mulled over these thoughts, my phone buzzed. I picked it up, expecting a work email or a message from a friend, but instead, it was a text from an unknown number. Michael, we need to talk. Call me. I stared at the message, a sinking feeling in my gut. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me it was him. Nick, the man who had inserted himself into my marriage and my life. My hands trembled as I debated what to do. Calling him would only escalate the situation, but ignoring him felt like conceding ground I wasn't willing to give. I was trapped, my emotions swirling in a chaotic storm. Before I could make a decision, another message came through. She didn't tell you everything, did she? The blood drained from my face as I read the words. What didn't I know? What more could there possibly be? My anger reignited, burning hotter than before. If Laura thought she could hide more lies from me, she was sorely mistaken. I stood abruptly, my jaw tight. It was time to get the truth, no matter how ugly it was. The unknown number burned in my hand as I stared at the screen. Nick, it had to be him. The man who had upended my marriage, wormed his way into my wife's life, and now had the audacity to reach out to me. I couldn't ignore it. Not now. Not after that last message. I tapped the number and hit call, each ring sending my heart racing. On the third ring, he answered. Michael, Nick said, his voice calm, almost smug. I was wondering how long it would take. What the hell do you want? I growled, gripping the phone so tightly I thought it might crack. To tell you the truth, he replied smoothly. The truth your wife hasn't been honest enough to share. I clenched my jaw. Cut the cryptic bullshit and say what you've got to say. There was a pause, and I could hear him taking a breath on the other end. She's been telling you this was just a fling, hasn't she? Something meaningless, just a lapse in judgment. I didn't answer, the silence heavy with tension. Well, it wasn't, Nick continued. At least not to her. She came to me. She confided in me. Told me how disconnected she felt from you. How she wasn't sure she even loved you anymore. My stomach twisted, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. And you took advantage of that, I said flatly. You saw an opportunity and pounced. He laughed, a low, mocking sound. You can paint me as the villain all you want, but the truth is, she made her own decisions. She came to me willingly, over and over again. My free hand balled into a fist. What do you want, Nick? Why are you calling me? Because I think you deserve to know the whole story, he said, his tone softening, as if he were doing me a favor. She didn't just cheat on you with me, Michael. There were others before me. The world seemed to tilt under my feet. What are you talking about? I demanded, my voice sharp. You think I was her first? He asked, his tone dripping with condescension. She told me about a man she used to meet during her lunch breaks at work, and another she saw a few times before you got married. I thought you want to know. Your perfect wife has been lying to you for years. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. I wanted to believe he was lying, trying to manipulate me, but there was something in his voice, a cruel certainty, that shook me to my core. Why should I believe you? I spat. You're just a homewrecker looking to twist the knife. You don't have to believe me, Nick said simply. Ask her yourself. And when she lies to your face again, think about why she didn't tell you the truth to begin with. I hung up, my hands shaking. The conversation had left me reeling, my mind racing with questions I didn't want answers to. Was Nick telling the truth? Could Laura have been hiding even more from me? And if she was, how far back did the lies go? I stormed into the living room, where Laura was still sitting with her suitcase. She looked up, startled by the fury on my face. What did you do? I demanded, my voice shaking with rage. She blinked, confused. What are you talking about? Nick just called me, I said, my tone sharp enough to cut glass. He told me you've been lying about more than just him, that there were others. Her face went pale, her eyes widening in panic. Michael, no, that's not true. Don't lie to me, I shouted, taking a step closer. Was he your first, or has this been going on for years? Tears filled her eyes, but I wasn't moved. She shook her head vehemently. He's lying. He's trying to turn you against me. I swear, Michael, there was no one else. Her denial only fueled my anger. You've lied to me about everything else, Laura. Why should I believe you now? I'm telling the truth, she insisted, her voice cracking. Yes, I made a horrible mistake with Nick, but he's just trying to ruin what's left of us. Please, Michael, don't let him get into your head. I stared at her, searching her face for any sign of deception. But all I saw was a woman breaking under the weight of her own actions. Could I believe her? Or was this just another layer of the web she'd spun around me? I don't know what to believe anymore, I said finally, my voice low and raw. But I do know one thing. I can't keep doing this. Not like this. Her tears fell freely now, but I turned away, retreating to the bedroom once more. As I closed the door behind me, the weight of her betrayal, and the possibility of even more, pressed down on me like a vice. For the first time since this all began, I realized I might never get the full truth. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most painful part of all. The morning after Nick's call, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. Laura was gone, her suitcase, the second phone, and even her favorite coffee mug missing from the house. For a fleeting moment, I thought maybe she had left for good. The thought felt like both a relief and a fresh stab of pain. But as I brewed my coffee, my phone buzzed. A message. From Nick. Did she come clean? Or is she still lying to you? I wanted to throw my phone against the wall. Instead, I ignored him and scrolled through my contacts until I landed on the name of someone who might actually have answers. Eric, my best friend. If anyone could help me think clearly, it was him. When Eric arrived later that afternoon, his laid-back demeanor was a welcome change from the chaos in my head. I explained everything, from Laura's confession to Nick's call, sparing no detail. By the time I finished, Eric sat back, his brow furrowed. Man, that's a lot, he said. I don't even know where to start. I don't know what to believe, I admitted. Nick says there were others, but Laura swears he's lying. And honestly, I don't trust either of them. Eric nodded slowly. Look, Nick's a scumbag for what he did, but he doesn't gain anything by lying now, does he? If Laura really had a history of this, he could just be telling you the truth to mess with her. Great, I muttered, rubbing my temples. So what am I supposed to do? Play detective in my own marriage? Eric shrugged. If it gives you closure, then maybe. But you need to ask yourself, even if Nick's lying, can you move past what Laura's already done? I didn't have an answer for that. The betrayal already felt insurmountable. But if there were more lies buried beneath it, I wasn't sure how I'd cope. That evening, Laura called. I almost didn't pick up, but my need for answers outweighed my pride. Michael, she said as soon as I answered, her voice shaky. I stayed at a friend's place last night. I didn't want to upset you by being in the house. I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. I know you don't believe me, she said, her words spilling out in a rush. But I swear, Nick is lying. He's just trying to ruin me. Ruin us. Why would he lie, Laura? I demanded. What does he get out of it? She hesitated, and I could hear her breathing unevenly. Because I ended things with him. He didn't take it well. He's been texting me nonstop, begging me to come back. When I didn't respond, I guess he decided to take it out on you. Her explanation sounded plausible, but plausible wasn't enough anymore. And the second phone? I asked coldly. What was that for? To keep it separate, she admitted quietly. I didn't want you to see the messages and misunderstand. I didn't realize how wrong that decision was until it was too late. I clenched my jaw. You expect me to trust you after all this? To believe you've told me the whole truth? I'll take a lie detector test, she said suddenly, desperation clear in her voice. I'll do anything, Michael. I just want you to see that I'm not the person Nick is trying to make me out to be. Her words hung in the air. A lie detector test? It sounded extreme, but maybe that was the point. If she was willing to go that far, Was it possible she really had nothing more to hide? I'll think about it, I said finally, my voice cold and distant. But I need time. The next day, I called a private investigator. If Laura wanted to prove her innocence, then I needed to know for sure. I handed over every detail I had: her recent behavior, Nick's texts, and the timeline of the affair. The PI assured me they'd dig into everything. While waiting for the investigation to unfold, I stayed at Eric's place. It felt strange being away from home, but the distance was a relief. Laura texted me daily, her messages a mix of apologies and reassurances. I responded sparingly, my emotions too raw to engage fully. 3 days later, the PI called. "We've found something," they said. "I think you'll want to see this." When I arrived at their office, the investigator handed me a folder. Inside were photos, emails, and call logs. My stomach dropped as I flipped through the evidence. It wasn't just Nick. There was another man, a co-worker from Laura's previous job. Their affair had lasted 6 months, just before we got married. There were emails, dates, even a hotel receipt. It was undeniable. And then, the kicker. Laura and Nick had met long before their work project. They'd been messaging for over a year, their relationship far more involved than she'd ever admitted. I closed the folder, my hands trembling. Laura hadn't just lied. She'd built her entire life with me on a foundation of deceit. When I got back to Eric's place, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the evidence in my hands. My marriage, my life, it had all been a lie. That evening, I sent Laura a single text. "We're done." Laura didn't take my text well. I knew she wouldn't, but I wasn't prepared for the storm it unleashed. Within minutes, my phone buzzed incessantly with messages and calls. I ignored them all, shutting it off and tossing it onto Eric's kitchen counter. I wasn't ready to face her pleas, her explanations, or her inevitable breakdown. Not now. Maybe not ever. That night, I slept fitfully on Eric's couch. Every time I closed my eyes, images of Laura's betrayal played on a loop. Her laughing with Nick, the messages from her other affair, the undeniable truth in the PI's folder. It felt like my life was a movie I couldn't pause, couldn't escape. The next morning, Eric shook me awake. "Hey man, you've got to deal with this," he said, holding out my buzzing phone. "She's called like 20 times, and now she's texting me, asking where you are." I sat up, groaning. I told her we're done. What else is there to say? "She's not going to stop until you make it clear," he said, handing me the phone. "You need to end this properly." Reluctantly, I powered it on. Dozens of texts from Laura appeared, her desperation seeping through every word. "Please don't do this, Michael. I love you. We can fix this. I'll do anything. You're my whole world. Don't throw us away. Michael, I'm begging you. Just talk to me." I scrolled past them all, feeling a strange mix of anger and sadness. But one message stopped me cold. "I'm at the house. If you don't come back, I don't know what I'll do." My heart sank. Laura wasn't just upset. She was spiraling. As much as I wanted to leave her in the wreckage of her own choices, I couldn't ignore the possibility that she might hurt herself. I grabbed my keys. "You heading over there?" Eric asked, concern etched on his face. "Yeah," I said. "She's losing it." Eric clapped me on the shoulder. "You need backup, you call me. Don't let her twist this on you." When I arrived at the house, Laura was sitting on the front steps, her face pale and tear-streaked. She looked up as I approached, her eyes wide and pleading. "Michael," she whispered, standing up, "I didn't think you'd come." "I got your message," I said curtly, crossing my arms. "What's going on, Laura?" She wrung her hands, her movements frantic. I can't do this. I can't lose you. Please, let me explain everything." "You've had plenty of chances to explain," I said, my voice cold. "And all you've done is lie. About Nick, about the other guy, about our entire marriage. What more is there to say?" Her breath hitched, and she stepped closer. "I was scared," she said, her voice trembling. "Scared of losing myself, scared of losing you. I made mistakes, yes, but they don't define everything we had. I love you, Michael. I've always loved you." I shook my head, my anger bubbling to the surface. "You don't destroy someone you love, Laura. You don't lie to them for years. You don't build a life on deceit and expect it to survive." "I'll do anything," she said, her voice breaking. I'll quit my job, cut all ties with Nick, move wherever you want. Just please don't leave me. Her desperation was palpable, but it only deepened my resolve. It's too late, I said, my voice heavy. You've already destroyed everything. I can't trust you. I don't even know who you are anymore. Her face crumpled, and she sank to her knees, sobbing. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. This was a woman I had loved once, a woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. But now, she was a stranger. I'll give you until the end of the week to move out, I said, turning away. After that, I want you gone. As I walked back to my car, her cries echoed behind me, each one pulling at my fraying resolve. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. This chapter of my life was over, and it was time to start writing the next one. That evening, I received an unexpected call from the private investigator. "We've found something else," they said. "Something you might want to know." "What is it?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. "It's not just Laura," they said. "Nick's been involved in multiple workplace affairs. His pattern is alarming. We think he may have intentionally targeted your wife." The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. Had Nick manipulated Laura? Or had she willingly walked into his trap? Either way, it didn't change the outcome. But it did add a new layer of complexity to the wreckage of my marriage. And for the first time, I wondered if Laura was as much a victim as I was. The investigator's revelation haunted me. Nick wasn't just some opportunistic co-worker. He was a predator, preying on vulnerable women in the workplace. The thought that Laura might have been one of his many conquests made my anger twist into something more complicated. Pity, maybe, or even guilt. But pity couldn't undo the betrayal. It couldn't erase the lies. That night, I sat at Eric's kitchen table, staring at the investigator's file spread out before me. Every photo, every text, every receipt told a story I didn't want to read. Laura had lied, yes, but Nick had orchestrated much of this, weaving a web that ensnared her and destroyed us. My phone buzzed, and for the first time in days, I felt compelled to answer Laura's call. I needed answers, not for reconciliation, but for clarity, for closure. "Michael," she said as soon as I picked up. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying for hours. "Thank you for answering." "Don't thank me," I said bluntly. "I need you to tell me the truth. All of it." She hesitated, her breathing uneven. "Okay," she said finally. "Ask me anything." "Nick," I began. "Did he manipulate you? Was he the one who started this?" There was a long pause, and I could almost hear her gathering her thoughts. "It's not that simple," she said quietly. "He didn't force me into anything, Michael. I made my own choices. But he knew how to exploit things. He made me feel seen, listened to, like I mattered in a way I hadn't felt in years." "And the others?" I pressed, my voice tightening. "Were there others? Or was Nick lying?" Her silence was answer enough. "There was one," she admitted finally. "Before we got married. It was brief, and I regretted it immediately. I should have told you then, but I was scared of losing you." I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow. "You were scared of losing me, so you just lied for 10 years? Makes sense." "Michael, she started, but I cut her off." "Save it," I said. "I've heard enough." She let out a soft sob. "I know I've lost you. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know it wasn't all a lie. The good times, the love we shared, they were real." I wanted to scream, to tell her that none of it mattered anymore. But deep down, I knew she was right. There had been love once, but it wasn't enough. Not anymore. The next morning, I made my final trip back to the house. Laura was there, standing by the doorway with her suitcase. She looked tired, defeated, her once bright eyes dull with regret. "I'm leaving," she said softly as I approached. "I found a place to stay. I'll come back for the rest of my things later." I nodded, my heart heavy but resolute. "Good." She hesitated, then held out an envelope. "This is for you," she said. "A letter. I wrote everything I couldn't say out loud. You don't have to read it, but I needed to write it." I took the envelope, tucking it into my jacket without a word. She stepped past me, pausing briefly on the porch. "For what it's worth," she said, her voice trembling, "I'll always love you, Michael. I hope someday you can find peace." I didn't respond, watching silently as she walked to her car and drove away. The house felt emptier than ever, the echoes of her presence lingering in every room. Later that evening, I sat on the couch, staring at the envelope she'd left me. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to sever every connection to her. But curiosity, or maybe a need for closure, won out. I opened it and began to read. Her words were raw, full of apologies and confessions. She admitted her mistakes, her insecurities, her fear of being vulnerable. She wrote about Nick, about how he had drawn her and during a time when she felt isolated and unseen. But most of all, she wrote about us, about the love she still felt and the regret she carried. By the time I finished, my emotions were a tangled mess. Her letter didn't absolve her, didn't erase the pain she'd caused, but it reminded me of the humanity behind the betrayal. She wasn't a monster. She was flawed like me, like all of us. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, unsure if I'd ever look at it again. Months later, I started to rebuild. The divorce was finalized, the house sold, and I moved into a new place closer to work. Therapy helped, not just for dealing with Laura's betrayal, but for understanding my own role in the breakdown of our marriage. I heard through mutual friends that Laura had moved to another city, that she was still trying to piece her life back together. I didn't reach out, and neither did she. Our story had ended, and we both had to live with the choices we'd made. As for Nick, the investigator's report had been enough to prompt an internal review at his workplace. He was fired for misconduct, his reputation tarnished. It wasn't justice, but it was something. Life moved on, slowly but surely. And while the scars of what happened would always remain, they became a part of my story, not the whole of it. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about Laura, about the life we'd built, and the one we'd destroyed. And though the pain lingered, I learned to forgive. Not for her sake, but for mine. Because in the end, the only way to truly move forward is to let go.